So it has been brought to my attention that another big argument people are having beyond just the Elden Ring discourse is the idea of whether or not games should be fun. And people getting very defensive over the idea that you shouldn't have to have fun in order to play a game. So, in order to capitalize on all that's hip and trending, for our critical thought today, we're going to talk about why fun is often viewed as a four-letter word when it comes to analyzing game design, and why there is a very big difference between defining a game as being bad and a game that is wrong. As we have unfortunately predicted over the last few weeks when it's come to Elden Ring's success and people arguing for and against it, that there has definitely been this outcry of people saying Elden Ring is great because it says screw you to approachability and accessibility, and people saying Elden Ring is a wrong game because it's not approachable and accessible. And this seems to be continuing our discussion of the whole does Dark Souls need a difficulty setting theme. But what is different about this time is that Elden Ring has the numbers to back it up. It is probably going to be one of the best-selling games of 2022, and arguably the best-selling game of From Software in some time. And it's thrown a lot of people kind of for a loop when it comes to game design and understanding what makes a game successful or a failure. And this was a discussion that was brought up on Twitter by the developer of Adios, I think, or Adios, I'm sorry. And I'll include his thread in the description or in the notes down below. But there's been this big problem, I think, when it comes to discussing game design. And as we've said on a recent Key to Games cast, there's a difference between game design and game dev. And game design is its own very specific area when it comes to development of a game. And if you don't understand it, it becomes very hard to articulate what is good, bad, and indifferent about a game. And the big point for today, and this was something else that was brought up on Twitter, was somebody saying that games don't have to be fun. And they got basically steamrolled on Twitter because of it. And the point is that, yes, games don't have to be fun, because the word fun means different things for different people. For me, fun is playing games on incredibly difficult difficulty settings and getting killed 500 times to a challenging fight. For somebody else, fun could be just walking around an area learning about history in one of the Assassin's Creed's museum modes. The point is that fun doesn't really work when it comes to talking about game design because it is very subjective in that respect. And there's definitely an issue when it comes to how people put their own opinions, I think, above the actual process or the goal of the game itself. As we've said many times, and on the recent Key to Games cast, that I can play a video game and say that I don't like it, but I can also explain why somebody else could also like this. And this is one of the bigger points, again, when we talk about this issue of fun. That there's this misconception from a lot of people that if they're not having fun with a game, then surely it's a bad game. Just as if they personally love a game, then it must be this perfect game and how dare you hate it or say anything bad about it. And this is, again, the problem when it comes to studying game design. That if we're talking about taking an objective look at a game's mechanics and systems, you have to ignore your own opinions to some extent. And you really need to look at what is the intention and goal that the developer is trying to achieve. And did they do that? This is why we talk about the art and science of games, because there is science to this art and vice versa. Again, like my recent good example of this is the platformer genre. There are thousands at this point in terms of platformers, from AA, AAA, indie, first-time developers, game jam games, etc. And you would think with a genre this old and with so many examples, it would be the easiest one to design. But as we've said, that there are fundamental or foundational elements to a platformer, just as there are to shooters and visual novel games, and pick any other genre that you can imagine. And if you don't get those fundamentals right, nothing else you do, no art style you want to add, no heartwarming story you want to put in, is going to make your game good, or it's going to make it seem like a success. And we have seen that difference when you compare platformers like the Marios, Super Meat Boy, N++, Celeste, and so on, to games that don't work. And when you put it in your hands and it just feels horrible to play. And as I said, there's this tendency among people, especially developers, I feel, who cannot separate their own opinions and thoughts from mechanics and systems. This is where we get so many people declaring that Dark Souls is inferior or wrong because it doesn't have a difficulty setting. And again, this gets back at that original point that for all the articles and videos and people saying that Dark Souls is a bad game because it's not accessible, people will then throw right in their faces Elden Ring being one of the most successful games of 2022. And then those people just left there scratching their heads. And in a way, this kind of is a very weird, I think, conflict between indie and mainstream or AAA developers. Because Elden Ring is not that unusual as a game. Anyone who's played indie games over the past 10 years has probably seen and played games that are stranger, harder to understand, or just plain odder than anything Elden Ring could produce. And this has been, again, one of the major aspects of indie development. That this willingness to explore genres and designs that you would never see come from a mainstream or a major studio. Because either it's a too risky of an idea, or it's something that no one else has really thought of. I mean, look at games like Getting Over It, Pogo Stuck, and Jump King. These are platformers that were designed to basically be as janky and as hard to control as possible. And they're also really good examples of our discussion. Is playing a game like Getting Over It a fun and happy experience? Probably not for most people. But does that make it a bad or wrong one? And the answer is no. And this is something that we've talked about before, this idea of when something is designed explicitly a certain way. If a developer is trying to get a unique or specific experience for the player, they're going to do something that is going to buck the normal trends. Now, does that make it good, bad, or indifferent? Again, in a vacuum like that, no. But it's important to understand what is the goal and intentions of the developer. And again, this is the difference between saying that this game is wrong, it is bad because I don't like this, this, and this, and saying that this game is like this, but I don't like it. Maybe you will enjoy it, but for me, it's not the kind of game I want to play. It's kind of like, in a weird way, like looking at like the whole like snobs versus the working class of like all the 80s comedies. Maybe all game dev is really just Caddyshack. So would that make me a Ronnie Dangerfield or am I the gopher? Let me know in the comments down below. But the point about this section is that using fun to define the good or bad or the quality of a game doesn't really work when we get into analyzing a design. Because you can have games that don't really aim to be a fun or happy experience. Would something like This War of Mine be a fun game to play? Or That Dragon Cancer? Or even something like a horror game? Again, for a lot of people out there, you probably don't find the idea of playing a game like Five Nights at Freddy's, Outlast, the DreadX collections, Resident Evils, and so on to be a fun experience. But there are a lot of people who do enjoy that. And again, this is why you have to be really careful when it comes to defining something as right or wrong, especially when it comes to mechanics and systems. So, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, I want to talk more about how do you discuss, the quality of a game in this respect, and why words like right and wrong aren't the best ways to talk about game design. But before we do that, if you're interested in more of my thoughts on game design, check out my latest books. For entry-level students, we have 20 Essential Games to Study, and then the Game Design Deep Dive series that takes an extensive look at different genres, with free-to-play coming in 2022. Just like as we've said that there are so many different ways of designing games, but you still have to rely on certain foundational elements, the same can be said about studying and analyzing a game's design. And why, despite so many YouTubers and streamers and journalists who do or cover video games, being able to talk and analyze a game's design is a far different field of study. And this is why, as I said in the last part, that you really do want to avoid words that are more opinionated if you're discussing specifically the design of a game. You shouldn't be saying that a game is wrong or it's right for something, or again, saying that it's fun or not fun. Because, as we've said, every game has a different intended audience. And this gets back to another point that I discussed in the past, and that is the idea of player-centric design. This was something that I was reading about back in the early 2000s. And I'm shaking everything as I'm talking. But it was this methodology to say that a game should be designed so that everyone can beat it. And I completely disagree with that, and I completely disagree with it now. And the reason why is, as we have seen, as has been proven, thanks to so many indie developers, is that people want a unique and high quality experience. And that experience needs to be focused on whoever that intended audience is. Whether you are designing a game for visual novel fans, 4X fans, FPSs, turn-based, and pick any other genre or design out there. When we talk about UI UX, it's about then taking that design, taking that intended audience, and figuring out how to remove or mitigate all the pain points that could stop somebody new or old in terms of fandom from enjoying that game. It's not about taking a platformer and saying, let's make a platformer for somebody who absolutely hates platforming, or who absolutely hates Souls-likes or first-person shooters. And this again goes back to that point about entitlement I said earlier, that if you're intended to buy a video game and think that's going to be 100% for you, and if it's not, then it's bad, well, it's within your right not to like a game. But it's not within your right to then blast this game as being bad because it didn't work 100% for you. Again, from a design standpoint. If a game doesn't work because it blows up your computer or freezes your hard drive, that's a different story. But again, the goal, or when we talk about analyzing games, it's about trying to get into the designer's head to figure out what did they intend? What was the intended experience? And if things get in the way of that, they are distracting from your core gameplay loop, or the UI is not helping you, those are elements we can point to as being problematic. And that is, again, that difference between saying that a game is bad or wrong. We can have a bad game. A game that the UI is not fitting the design, the controls just don't work, maybe the game is poorly explained or documented. But to say that it is wrong for having certain aspects to it is not the correct terminology. Like we've said, there are plenty of systems and mechanics out there that are very polarizing. I hate durability systems and consumable systems in games. Does that mean they're wrong to have in them? No. They're just something that I don't like in the games I play. And again, when I review games that have them, I can point out that I don't like these systems, but you might really love them, as evident by the many survival crafting sims and fans out there today. And this is why it becomes very hard to talk about these things, especially at a professional or kind of academic level. Because a lot of people will put their own opinions in and say that if I don't like this game, then it is wrong. It is wrongly designed because it doesn't appeal to me. And there is certainly a problem with that. And why so many people are kind of I guess, throwing it back into reviewers and developers' faces over Elden Ring right now. That for all there, it's wrong and you shouldn't design a game like this. Again, there is a very good chance it's going to be one of the best selling games of 2022. And it's going to do that in spite, or to almost spite, all the other traditional forms of game design. And some people will probably try and spin this as saying, oh, this is From Software finally getting with the rest of the industry, or, figuring out how to break their own games or alter them. And no. Elden Ring is very similar to Dark Souls, which is very similar to Demon's Souls, which is very similar to King's Field. It's just that the rest of the industry has caught up, and that they create a package that resonates with a lot of people. And in a piece that I'm writing right now, I'm talking about this, that with games like Disco Elysium, Celeste, Getting Over It, that the developer's intention was not to design a mass market game of the year, multi-million best-selling game. They wanted to design the game they wanted to play. They wanted to design a game in that specific genre with that intended experience. And it's one of those cases where it resonated with a lot of people. Vampire Survivors right now is another big case in point. That there are people who are probably spending more time playing that than they probably did games like Assassin's Creed, like a lot of massively open world games or RPGs. And there are people, again, I think designers, who view this as kind of like an attack on their own design sensibilities. That if I say that this is wrong, but the market says that this is right, then surely the market is wrong. It can't be me, somebody who's worked in major studios and been a part of all these major games. We can't be wrong. And unfortunately, it's a very weird, and I think it's still a very pervasive opinion among a lot of people in the AAA space, that because you have that prestige and clout, that it somehow makes your game inherently more important or right compared to somebody who comes along and does things differently. And for the last 20 or so years, there's been that, we had to erode that stigma of indie games. That 20 years ago, indie games were viewed as shovelware. They were the 50-cent options. There's something that you buy for a grandchild's birthday when you forget about them at a dollar store. And now when we look at games today, we have seen indie games become more popular, more recognizable, and even more successful than titles from massive studios. I mean, there is a very good reason why Microsoft has been snatching up as many studios, especially indie labels, over the past 5 years. Why Sony and Nintendo have been courting them for their respective platforms. Because they are doing something that is different, that is resonating with people, and of course the most important point, it's making lots of money. And that is, again, always the driving force when it comes to the market. We can shout from our respective cameras or make pieces about why a game is bad and this is horrible and you shouldn't play it and blah blah blah. But if a game turns out to be one of the top 10 or even top 3 best-selling games for the year and everyone is buying it, your thoughts are kind of going to be countered by that. And like I said, with Elden Ring in particular, I still have to make my very clickbaity video about why I don't like it. But the reasons why I don't like it doesn't mean that it is wrong or that it is a bad game. It's more about kind of the nuts and bolts compared to the overall package. And the overall package for Elden Ring is, as we've already said many times over, really quite good considering how well it's doing. And again, just because I say I don't like X, Y, and Z doesn't mean this game is now inferior because of that. Because again, like our major point for today is that there is no one perfect game. People keep trying to say, oh, there's no better game than The Last of Us 2 or Doom Eternal or pick any other major property. But guess what? There are people who hate The Last of Us 2 and Doom Eternal, and they are fair in their assessment, just as there are people who say they love those games. You cannot find the perfect video game, because there is no one perfect game. We all have our own perfect games. And that doesn't make them any less good and doesn't make them any more bad to somebody else. And ultimately, it's the goal of the designer to come up with an intended experience and then package that in a way that is as appealing as possible without losing that core message. And I think that's kind of where the secret sauce of Elden Ring lies. That, as I said, it is very much just the same game that From Software has been pointing out for the last 20 years. It's just packaged in a far more approachable way than those games have done before. And again, before this turns into an Elden Ring design video, we're going to stop things here. So, to wrap things up, there is no such thing as fun being a qualitative measurement for a video game. You can have games that are unfun or not fun. You can have games that are a mile-a-minute joyride. But fun should not be used as an academic metric for whether or not a game works. And saying that a game is bad or right or wrong or good and stuff like that along those words doesn't really help describe the systems of a game. Just because I like a game doesn't mean it's a great game, just as if I hate a game doesn't mean that it's a bad game either. And you have to be able to put this or be able to frame things from a system and a mechanical standpoint. Because that's how we get to have better discussions about design and how people can learn why does a Mario game succeed so much as a platformer when all these other games did not. Why does Elden Ring work better than other titles who have done similar designs? Why don't people, or why did so many people kind of say no to AAA open world games like Horizon, like, Dying Light 2, and so on? Because some people will say, well, it's because, they're just wrong about their opinions. But as we've said, one of the worst things you can do as a developer is tell someone that you don't like this game because it's your problem. It's not anything that I did. I mean, I should throw that Seymour Skinner meme of the children that are wrong at some point in this video. But with that said, thank you for watching today's Critical Thought. As always, do the liking, subscribing, and commenting. Check out our Discord and Patreon link down below. And if you have ideas for future Critical Thoughts, let me know. Come back for daily discussions on game design here and on game wisdom, where some of the art and science of games. Until next time, take care.